Some stories aren't legends. There's a kind that make you wish they were. It began quietly, in a small town called Tuskegee, Alabama. 1932. The Great Depression was breaking families apart, and in the middle of it all, the US government arrived, promising free healthcare and hope. But what they gave wasn't treatment. It was a death sentence.
Some stories weren't meant to be told, yet here they are. Welcome to Mystery Junky.
In the early 1930s, syphilis was spreading fast across the United States. A painful, slow disease that attacked the body and the mind. There was no known cure at the time, but there were treatments, dangerous ones. Mercury, arsenic, drugs that could burn away the infection, or the patient along with it. So, when government doctors showed up in the black farming communities of Macon County, Alabama, people listened. They told men they were being treated for bad blood, a local term for anything from anemia to fatigue. They said they'd get free meals, checkups, and medicine. In reality, they were about to be used as human test subjects. 600 men signed up. 400 of them were already infected with syphilis. 200 were not. They'd be the control group. No one told them what was really being studied. No one told them they had the disease. They were lied to from the very beginning. The study was run by the US Public Health Service, the same branch that was supposed to protect people. Doctors wore white coats and handed out pills that did nothing. They drew blood, ran tests, and watched. Because that's what this experiment was about. Watching. Watching what happened to the human body when syphilis was left untreated. The doctors told the men they were curing them. But every dose, every fake injection, every hospital visit was part of the illusion. These weren't evil men in the shadows. They were professionals, educated, smiling, and yet they recorded every symptom, every death, with the same calm tone you'd use to describe the weather. One of them, Dr. Raymond Vonderlehr, even called the study a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He was right. It would never be allowed again. Years passed. Decades. The world changed, but Tuskegee didn't. When World War II began, penicillin was discovered, the real cure for syphilis. By 1947, it was available across the country, but not for the men of Tuskegee. Doctors made sure they never got it. Letters were sent to local draft boards, warning them not to treat the men who registered for the military. The government literally tracked these patients to make sure they stayed sick. By then, the disease had begun destroying their bodies and their minds. Syphilis, when left untreated, eats away at the nervous system. It causes blindness, paralysis, madness. And all the while, researchers kept taking notes, calling it progress. One nurse, the only black woman on the team, began to feel something wasn't right. Her name was Eunice Rivers. She had been hired to help communicate between the doctors and the men, but what she saw haunted her. She saw the sores, the pain, the confusion, men begging her for medicine that didn't exist, and she couldn't tell them the truth because she'd been ordered not to. Years later, she would testify that she didn't think of it as cruel. She thought she was helping. But the truth is, she was helping to keep them quiet. And all the while, researchers kept taking notes, calling it progress. The deception lasted 40 years. By 1972, 128 of the men were dead from syphilis or its complications. Dozens more had gone blind, insane, or sterile. Wives had been infected. Children had been born with the disease. And all of it, in the name of science. It might have gone on even longer, if not for one man. His name was Peter Buxton, a public health worker. He discovered the study's internal reports and realized what was happening. He wrote letters to his superiors, begging them to shut it down. No one responded. So in 1972, he went to the press. The Washington Star published the story first, then the New York Times, and within hours, the entire country knew. Government deceives hundreds of black men in secret disease experiment. America's faith in its own institutions cracked overnight. The reaction was immediate. Senate hearings were held. News anchors demanded answers. How could this happen? How could doctors, sworn to heal, let men die for 40 years just to fill a report? Dr. John Heller, one of the study's directors, defended it publicly. He said, "The men were volunteers in a scientific study. There was no racism." But there was. Every single man used in that experiment was black. Every doctor in charge was not. When the hearings ended, the government finally shut it down. The remaining survivors were offered treatment, but for many, it was too late. The damage was done, physically, emotionally, generationally. In 1973, a class action lawsuit was filed. The men and their families eventually received a small settlement. But no one was ever criminally charged. No one went to prison. In 1997, President Bill Clinton stood before the last living survivors and said, "What was done cannot be undone, but we can end the silence." He apologized on behalf of the United States. Most of the men were already gone by then. Only 8 were still alive to hear it. The Tuskegee Study became a turning point in medical ethics. Afterward, new laws were written. Human research would require informed consent, independent review boards, oversight. But the shadow of Tuskegee didn't fade, because that single word, experiment, had changed forever. It no longer meant progress. It meant betrayal. In the years that followed, many African American communities lost trust in doctors, and for good reason. Generations would grow up hearing whispers about bad blood, and when new vaccines, trials, or treatments appeared, the ghosts of Tuskegee still lingered. Some say that's the real legacy of the study. Not the data, not the papers, but the silence it created. A silence that still echoes in hospitals today. Eunice Rivers, the nurse who stayed through it all, died in 1986. She was buried quietly in Tuskegee. No plaque, no mention of her role. Peter Buxton, the whistleblower, lives a quiet life. He once said in an interview, "If I hadn't spoken, they might still be running it." And maybe that's the scariest part. Not that this happened in 1932, but it lasted until 1972. For 40 years, people suffered and died, not because of ignorance, but because of choice. A system that decided some lives were worth studying and not saving. The Tuskegee Syphilis Study was real. Every document, every name, every life. A government-funded tragedy, disguised as medicine. It began as science and ended as horror. Because sometimes, the most disturbing experiments don't happen in secret rooms, but in plain sight.